What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Monday, March 22nd. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have an 8-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the point guard position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Corey Joseph from the Sacramento Kings playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the 12th worst defense overall and they're middle of the pack defending opposing point guards. Corey Joseph, he's averaged 15.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 21 minutes per game with a 14% usage rate. But he scored 26, 6, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 19, and 25 minutes. So the problem with Corey Joseph is he can totally stain the bet on you guys. He can get you that 6, kill your lineup, or he can get you over 20 fantasy points and crush value. So he's projected at 22 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.9 times value. He's 3,700 FanDuel salary and 500 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Now he scored 39, 22, 18, 29, and 5 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Cavaliers. So that's really good player versus team history. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 225 points scored in this game. So I like Corey Joseph as a high risk, high reward tournament play here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, another point guard that I like is Jordan Clarkson from the Utah Jazz playing the Chicago Bulls, who have a middle of the pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing point guards, Jordan Clarkson has averaged 27.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 15, 16, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 22, 24, and 30 minutes. He's projected at 26.4 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 5.7 times value. Because he's only 4,600 FanDuel salary, but he is 1,400 more on DraftKings, so probably a FanDuel play only for me. And he scored 14, 23, 34, 22, and 18 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Bulls. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 231.5 points scored in this game, so you got a high scoring game. So I like Jordan Clarkson on FanDuel here versus the Chicago Bulls. Okay, another point guard that I like is Kyle Lowry from the Toronto Raptors playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Kyle Lowry has averaged 36.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 35, 28, and 43 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 40, 34, and 35 minutes. He's projected at 36.8 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 40 fantasy points or more in this matchup and get you 5 times value or more. He's 7,900 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. He scored 52, 36, 19, 29, and 43 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Houston Rockets. So he got you 5 times value or more, pretty much 3 out of those 5 games. He's got a pretty big ceiling, great matchup, fast-paced game. So I like Kyle Lowry here versus the Houston Rockets. Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching. If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal, all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won, and then we'll send you $100 PayPal. So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Terry Rozier from the Charlotte Hornets playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Terry Rozier has averaged 32.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 17, 32, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 26, 37, and 27 minutes. He's projected at 39 fantasy points here tonight. That's 6.6 times value. He's $5,900 FanDuel salary and $700 more on DraftKings. Terry Rozier is dealing with a hip injury, but he did play last game, although he only played 26 minutes. I expect his minutes to go up into the 30s, and he's got a great matchup here, and he scored 52, 34, 18, 8, and 28 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the San Antonio Spurs. I love his FanDuel price. DraftKings, I may shy away just a little bit because of that hip injury. Not sure how many minutes he's going to play, but I think it's a high risk, high reward play here, especially on FanDuel. So I like Terry Rozier here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Caris LeVert from the Indiana Pacers playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Caris LeVert has averaged 32.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 24, 23, and 35 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 34, 32, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 34.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 6.1 times value. He's $5,600 FanDuel salary and $800 more on DraftKings. So he scored 14, 33, and 35 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Bucks. Vegas thinks there's going to be 229 points scored in this game. It's a great positional matchup, and his price on FanDuel is still just way too low. So I like Caris LeVert here versus the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Devontae Graham from the Charlotte Hornets playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Devontae Graham has averaged 25.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 20, 25, and 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 18, 22, and 17 minutes. He's projected at 25 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.8 times value. He's $4,300 FanDuel salary and $500 more on DraftKings. So this is definitely a tournament play only. It's definitely a risky play here. Going to be low ownership, but I think on FanDuel at only $4,300 FanDuel salary, even on DraftKings under 5K, this guy does have some upside, and he could be a sneaky play, especially if they limit Terry Rozier, give Devontae Graham some extra minutes. Hard to know what's going to happen there. I would not play Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham in the same lineup, but pick one of those guys. They're both pretty low salary here tonight, so I like Devontae Graham here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Paul George from the LA Clippers playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Paul George has averaged 39.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 42, 46, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 41, and 37 minutes. He's projected at 39.3 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can get you 42 fantasy points or more and get you 5 times value or more. He's $8,200 FanDuel salary, and he's the same price on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, but I especially like that DraftKings price where it's hard to find players that are priced the same as they are on FanDuel. And he scored 52, 50, and 34 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Hawks. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 224 points scored in this game. So I like Paul George here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. Here's a value play for you. I like Justin Holiday from the Indiana Pacers playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Justin Holiday has averaged 23.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 14% usage rate. He scored 34, 25, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 41, 27, and 36 minutes. He's projected at 23.5 fantasy points here tonight, and on FanDuel, that's 6 times value. He's only $3,900 FanDuel salary. He is $900 more on DraftKings, but he scored 35, 19, 15, 9, and 20 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Bucks. So not amazing player versus team history there. Really only crushed value 1 out of the 5 games. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 229 points scored in this game. So I like Justin Holiday, especially on FanDuel here versus the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, another small forward that I like is Chris Middleton from the Milwaukee Bucks playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing small forwards. Chris Middleton has averaged 36.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He scored 34, 21, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 40, and 34 minutes. He's projected at 37.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's $7,000 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. Now, he scored 21, 31, 30, and 28 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pacers. So again, not great player versus team history, but Vegas thinks there is going to be 229 points scored in this game, and he's been playing well lately, playing a ton of minutes. His price is good on both sites, so I like Chris Middleton here versus the Indiana Pacers. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, another small forward that I like is Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Harrison Barnes has averaged 30.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 30, 33, and 38 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 38, and 35 minutes. He's projected at 31.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's $6,000 FanDuel salary and 400 more on DraftKings. He scored 16, 27, 40, 36, and 41 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Cavaliers, so he would have crushed value 3 out of those 5 games. He's playing really well lately, plenty of minutes, plenty of production. I really like this play on both sites, so I like Harrison Barnes here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I'm going to give you a high risk, high reward, value play, tournament play only. I like Bobby Portis from the Milwaukee Bucks playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Bobby Portis has averaged 23.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 21 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate. Now, he's only scored 15, 8, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 15, 12, and 15 minutes, but he's projected at 29 fantasy points here tonight. That's 7.8 times value. He's 3,700 FanDuel salary and 400 more on DraftKings. He scored 45, 27, 17, 16, and 14 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Pacers. It's an excellent positional matchup here. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 229 points scored in this game. This is a gut call for me, tournament play only, but I like Bobby Portis here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, another power forward that I like is Lauri Markkanen from the Chicago Bulls playing the Utah Jazz, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing power forwards, but Lauri Markkanen has averaged 28.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 29, 17, and 22 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 28, 29, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 28.5 fantasy points here tonight, so right around his season average, and that's 5.3 times value. He's 5,400 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings, and he scored 34, 32, and 30 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Jazz. Vegas thinks there's going to be 231.5 points scored in this game, so you got a high scoring game. I think he's got a great chance to get you 5 times value or more in this one. I think he makes a good cash game play. If you're playing double ups, I think he's a solid double up player, but I think he's also a fine player to play in tournaments. His DraftKings price is great, only $100 more than FanDuel, so I like Lauri Markkanen here versus the Utah Jazz. Okay, moving on to the center position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Moses Brown from the Oklahoma City Thunder playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing centers. Moses Brown has scored 31, 16, and 53 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 28, 23, and 29 minutes. He's projected at 25.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 6 times value. He's 4,300 FanDuel salary and 800 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. This is a great matchup, so I like Moses Brown here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, another center that I think his price is just too low. I like Miles Turner from the Indiana Pacers playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and although they've been pretty good versus opposing centers, Miles Turner has averaged 34.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He scored 38, 35, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 21, and 24 minutes. He's projected at 32.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.6 times value. He's 5,700 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. So he scored 15, 17, 37, 25, and 45 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Bucks. I just think his price is a little bit too low considering he scored 38 and 35 fantasy points in the last 2 games, and he's averaging 34.2 fantasy points per game. So he gets your season average. He's going to crush value. Great price on both sites. So I like Miles Turner here versus the Milwaukee Bucks. And a stud pick for you at the center position, I like Karl Anthony Towns from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Karl Anthony Towns has averaged 45.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 34, 64, and 52 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35 minutes in each of those games. He's projected at 47.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $9,700 FanDuel salary, and he's $200 less on DraftKings. So the reason I like this pick here tonight is because he's coming off of a bad game, and he scored 65 and 60 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Thunder. So I like Karl Anthony Towns here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.